My father's last words to me were screamed on the steps of an abandoned church. "You are a mistake God regrets making." He left me there, shivering in the dark. When I was 12. 17 years of silence later. My phone buzzed at midnight. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand. "Your brother is getting married. We will allow you to attend. If you pay for the altar flowers to cleanse your sin, they want my money to decorate the altar of their golden child. They think I'm coming back to beg. They have no idea I booked a first-class ticket just to deliver a forensic audit that will send them all to prison. Before I destroy their holy facade, tell me in the comments, what is the most unforgivable thing your family has ever done?" I didn't throw my phone. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I just set the device down on my glass desk, right next to the blueprints for the community center I was designing. In my line of work, panic is a liability. Precision is the only currency that matters. When you are an architect, you learn very quickly that if a foundation is rotten, you don't paint over it. You don't pray for it to hold. You condemn it. Then, you bring it down. I sat in my ergonomic chair and opened my laptop. The screen glowed cool and blue, illuminating the dark office. My fingers moved across the trackpad with practiced ease, navigating through layers of security, until I reached a hidden folder I had created 5 years ago. I named it The Foundation. It wasn't filled with family photos or nostalgic letters. It was filled with digital receipts, scanned public records, and years of silent, clinical observation. I had been building this case files the way one builds a skyscraper steel beam by steel beam, waiting for the moment the weight would be sufficient to crush the ground beneath it. I was about to turn their test of penance into a catastrophic structural failure. I pulled up a travel website. The wedding was being held at the Cliffside Manor, a venue that screamed old money and new debt. I knew the style well. It was the kind of place that relied on heavy drapes to hide water damage and excessive gilding to distract from the cracks in the plaster. It was perfect for them, a facade of grandeur built on a cliff edge, waiting for gravity to do its job. I booked a first-class ticket for a flight leaving the next morning. I didn't choose the cheapest option. I wasn't going back as the poor, shivering girl they remembered. I was going as the inspector who knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were, and exactly how to remove them. I confirmed the reservation without a second of hesitation. Then, I opened my banking app. $15,000. That was the number I had decided on. It sat in my primary savings account, a dense block of potential energy waiting to be released. My father wanted a penance. He wanted a sign of my submission. I would give him a financial transaction so cold it would freeze the ink on his checkbook. I initiated the transfer to a separate holding account I managed. I typed the label for the transaction carefully. Severance. This wasn't a gift. It wasn't an offering. It was the demolition budget. I watched the progress bar load, the green line moving steadily across the screen until the word completed flashed in bold letters. The money was ready. I was ready. They thought they were summoning a sinner to beg for forgiveness. They thought they could use their version of God to shame me into silence one last time. They didn't realize they were inviting the one person who knew exactly how their house was built, and more importantly, exactly how to take it apart. Brick by hypocritical brick. I closed my laptop. The city lights outside seemed brighter now, sharper, like diamonds scattered on black velvet. I wasn't going back to reconcile. I was going back to finish the job they started 17 years ago. They wanted a show. I would give them a spectacle. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of my office into the night. The demolition had officially begun. To understand why I act this way, you have to understand the night the ice cracked. It was 17 years ago. I was 12. We were driving back from one of my parents' spiritual retreats in the desert. A weekend spent praying for prosperity and perfection. I was sitting in the back seat of my father's pristine Lincoln Town car, trying to make myself as small as possible. The air conditioning was humming. A low, artificial breeze that smelled of new leather and my mother's expensive perfume. I was eating a chocolate ice cream cone we had stopped for earlier, a rare treat that felt like a trap even then. The car hit a sudden, violent bump in the road. My hand jerked. The scoop of dark chocolate ice cream toppled from the cone and landed face down on the beige leather seat. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a stain, but in my family. A stain was a sin. My father, David, slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt on the gravel shoulder. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, like the air before a storm. He turned around. His face wasn't red with anger. It was pale with a terrifying, righteous calm. He looked at the seat, then at me. "Get out," he said. His voice was quiet, deadly. I scrambled out of the car, clutching the empty cone. We were parked in front of an old stone church. A small, abandoned structure sitting alone in the vast emptiness of the desert. The sun had set hours ago, and the only light came from the car's headlights cutting through the darkness. My father walked over to me, grabbed my arm, and dragged me toward the church steps. He didn't hit me. He never hit me. He used words that cut deeper than any belt. "I prayed for a blessing," he hissed, his grip bruising my skin. "I asked the Lord for a legacy, and he gave me you. A clumsy, useless burden who destroys everything she touches. You are a punishment. Alyssa, a test. I am failing." He shoved me toward the heavy wooden doors. They were locked. "You stay here. You stand on these steps and you pray until you have repented for your carelessness. Ask God why he made you this way." Then he turned around, walked back to the car, and got in. My mother, Heather, didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, her profile sharp and unmoving against the window glass. The engine roared to life. The tires crunched on the gravel, and then they drove away. I watched the red taillights shrink into the distance until they were just two angry eyes in the dark. And then they were gone. The silence of the desert crashed down on me. It was absolute. I was 12 years old, standing in the dark, miles from anything, abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect me. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment I learned the most important lesson of my life. My parents didn't hate me because I was bad. They hated me because they were weak. They were spiritual narcissists. They needed to believe they were chosen, perfect, blessed, and every time I made a mistake, spilled milk. A messy room, a stain on a seat. I threatened that image. I was the mirror, reflecting their own imperfections back at them. To save their egos, they had to demonize me. They had to believe I was the problem so they could remain the saints. God wasn't their savior, he was their weapon. And that night, they pointed it straight at me. That night lasted 1,000 years. The desert temperature dropped with a violence that shocked me. I was wearing a thin summer dress, the kind my mother insisted was ladylike, and it offered no protection against the biting wind. I curled into a tight ball on the rough stone steps, pressing my back against the heavy wooden doors of the church. I tried the handle one last time. It was locked solid. That was the moment the last of my childhood faith evaporated. My parents had left me here to find God, but God had locked the doors and turned out the lights. If there was a mercy in this world, it wasn't inside that building. It was somewhere else. Or it didn't exist at all. I waited for the tears. I waited for the panic to make me scream, to make me run into the darkness, chasing their taillights. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a strange, heavy silence settled over me. Psychologists call it the freeze response, but I call it the invisible chain of the survivor. It's a mechanism the brain uses when it realizes no one is coming to save you. You don't fight. You don't flee. You detach. You realize that crying burns calories you need to keep warm. You realize that hope is a liability. So, you turn off the lights in your own house. You become a statue. Because statues don't feel the cold. And statues don't break. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the horizon, letting the frost settle on my skin, turning my heart into something hard and sharp and impenetrable. Morning arrived, not with a burst of glory, but with the crunch of gravel. An old pickup truck pulled up. A woman stepped out, not my mother. Not an angel. But Mrs. Patricia, the church's housekeeper. She was holding a basket of cleaning supplies. She stopped when she saw me. A small, shivering heap on the steps. She didn't ask what I had done to deserve this. She didn't preach about sin. She dropped her basket and ran to me. "Oh, honey," she whispered, wrapping a thick wool blanket around my shoulders. It smelled like dust and lavender. "You're freezing." She rubbed my arms, her hands rough and warm. She gave me water from her thermos. For the first time in 12 hours, I felt the blood return to my fingers. It hurt. The warmth was more painful than the cold because it reminded me that I was alive and that I had been discarded. Mrs. Patricia drove me to the nearest town, to a payphone. She waited while I called my parents. They didn't answer the first time. When they finally picked up, my father didn't sound relieved. He sounded annoyed, as if I were a package that had been delivered to the wrong address. When I walked back into my parents' house hours later, the air conditioning was humming the same low, artificial tune. My mother was arranging flowers in a crystal vase. She glanced at me, her eyes sweeping over my disheveled dress, the dust on my shoes. "Hopefully," she said, snipping the stem of a white rose. "You've learned to be more careful." She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was hungry. She went back to her flowers. I looked at her, and I felt nothing. The fear was gone. The need for their love was gone. It had frozen to death on those stone steps. I walked past her, up the stairs to my room, and closed the door. That was the day Alyssa, the daughter, died. And Alyssa, the architect, was born. I started designing my exit that very afternoon. I stopped being messy. I stopped being loud. I became efficient. I realized that if I wanted to survive this family, I didn't need their forgiveness. I needed a plan. And I had 17 years to perfect it. The vibration of my phone pulled me back from the memory of the freezing desert to the air-conditioned sterility of my office. It was my mother. "Heather." I let it ring twice before answering. I needed to make sure my voice was stripped of any emotion. Polished, smooth, like marble. "Alyssa," she said. There was no warmth, only the frantic, breathless cadence of a woman trying to orchestrate a miracle on a budget. "We need to settle the accounts before the wedding. The Lord provides, but He expects us to do our part." "Hello, Mother," I said. I assumed my invitation was the settlement. "Don't be difficult," she snapped. "David and I have been praying for your heart. But prayer doesn't pay the vendors. We are short on the altar flowers. The florist is demanding $5,000 by noon. Or she walks, we thought. Well, we decided this would be a beautiful way for you to contribute. A tithing, if you will. A way to show Benjamin and Jessica that you are truly supportive of this union." I almost laughed. $5,000. They wanted me to pay $5,000 for flowers that would die in 24 hours. To decorate an altar where they would stand and lie to God. It wasn't about the money. They had money. Or at least, they projected the image that they did. This was a dominance play. They wanted to see if I would jump. They wanted to see if the checkbook was open. If the prodigal daughter was willing to buy her way back into the fold. $5,000. I repeated flatly. For flowers. For the glory of the ceremony. She corrected, her voice dropping to that pious whisper she used when she was trying to manipulate someone. Think of it as an offering. Alyssa, a seed sown in faith. I looked at the transfer I had already prepared on my screen, the $15,000 sitting in the severance account. I could end this now. I could tell her exactly where to put her flowers. But a demolition expert knows you don't detonate the explosives while the building is still empty. You wait until everyone is inside. You wait until the lights are on and the audience is watching. Fine, I said. Send me the routing number. I'll wire it. She didn't say thank you. She exhaled. a sound of supreme entitlement. Good. That's good. Maybe there is hope for you yet. She hung up. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Benjamin. The golden child. The groom. Mom says you're covering the flowers. Good. Just a heads up, Jessica's family is very respectable. Old money. Don't wear anything. Architectural. No sharp edges. Try to look soft. We don't need you scaring the guests. I stared at the message. Respectable. The word sat there on the screen. Heavy with irony. Benjamin, who I strongly suspected was funding his lifestyle through less than holy means, was lecturing me on respectability. He was worried about the cut of my dress while he was cutting corners on his own soul. They were all so terrified of the surface, of the image, of the softness. They had no idea that I wasn't bringing sharp edges to the wedding. I was bringing a sledgehammer. I typed a reply. Don't worry, brother. I'll be dressed for the occasion. I hit send. Then I authorized the wire transfer for the flowers. $5,000 gone. It was the price of admission. They thought they were extracting value from me. They thought they had won a small victory, forcing the black sheep to pay for the wool. They didn't understand that I wasn't paying for flowers. I was paying for the right to stand in that room. I was paying for the microphone. And compared to what I was about to take from them, $5,000 was a bargain. The flight to the coast was smooth. But my thoughts were not. I spent the entire trip reviewing files from my secure drive, the church building fund. For 5 years. My parents had collected donations to build a cathedral. For 5 years. Benjamin had skimmed the money. Creative accounting. Shell companies. Theft disguised as faith. I arrived a day early and skipped the rehearsal dinner. Instead, I drove straight to the county clerk's office. Thanks to the 2% share, my grandmother left me in the family holding company. I had access. In the records room. I cross-referenced public filings with private ledgers I'd pulled from Benjamin's email years ago. The truth was undeniable: fake consulting fees. Aspen ski trips. Vegas casinos. Over $200,000 stolen from a fund meant for God. Benjamin wasn't just a hypocrite. He was a felon. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed to know who else would be hurt. At the Cliffside Manor, I found Jessica alone in the lobby. Radiant. Exhausted. Innocent. She told me quietly that she was pregnant. In that moment, everything changed. This wasn't just about exposing a thief. It was about protecting a child who would grow up inside the same lie-filled system that had nearly destroyed me. That night, the reception was pure excess crystal chandeliers. Champagne. $5,000 in white roses I'd paid for. I entered late. Dressed in black. The room fell silent. My father was mid-toast about family and faith when I took the microphone. I told the room the truth about being abandoned as a child. About a God who doesn't live in houses built on lies. Then I placed a black folder on the table beside the wedding cake. A forensic audit. $200,000 in stolen donations. Ski trips. Gambling debts. Fraud. Jessica opened the folder. Benjamin went pale. You asked me to pay for the flowers, I said. I paid for the audit instead. I dropped the microphone and walked out as the room collapsed behind me. I blocked every number, cut every tie. Instead of returning to the hotel, I drove south to a stretch of raw coastline I'd bought months earlier. Empty land. Quiet. This would become a community center for kids like the one I used to be. Some would call it revenge. They're wrong. This was not destruction. It was clearing poisoned ground, so something healthy could grow. Standing under the open sky, I finally understood I didn't need their church. I didn't need their forgiveness. I had saved myself. And for the first time, I felt free.